fame can be a double-edged sword. For many, it promises endless glory, wealth, and adoration. But for others, it is a curse, a slow descent into darkness and despair. These are the stories of stars who, despite their dazzling brilliance, fell victim to the very forces that made them legends. Their names were once synonymous with success, but behind the flashing lights and camera lenses, something far more sinister was lurking. What drove these stars to the brink? And what happens when the fame you've spent your life chasing ends up consuming you whole? Today, we dive deep into the shocking and tragic tales of celebrity scandals and the terrifying price of fame. The haunting of Britney Spears, the dark path to freedom. Once upon a time, Britney Spears was a name that everyone knew, the shining star of pop music who graced the world with her youthful voice and endless promise. Her smile seemed to light up the darkest rooms, her performances captivated millions, and the world watched in awe as she became a pop sensation beyond measure. But behind that bright facade, something else was taking root. Something dark. Something that would forever change her life. It began subtly. The endless hours of rehearsals, the grueling performances, the demands of a career that never stopped. But what was truly happening behind the scenes? People didn't know that the pressure was slowly pushing her to the brink. It wasn't just the media that watched her every move. There was something deeper, something darker. The once vibrant young woman seemed to fade bit by bit, slipping through the cracks of her own fame. As Britney's career soared, so did the constant scrutiny of her every move. The cameras caught everything, her every outfit, her every word, her every laugh. It was exhausting, the way she had to keep up with the ever-present eyes of the world. But it wasn't just the paparazzi who were watching. What many didn't see was the toll fame took on her private life, the mental strain, the endless demands, the feeling of being suffocated by the weight of expectations. Every moment of happiness was overshadowed by the looming presence of judgment. And that's when the whispers began. At first it was just talk, a few strange incidents, a few unexplainable moments. Friends saw it too, her erratic behavior, her shifting moods. But no one knew what was really happening. Was it the fame? Was it the endless expectations? Or was there something else? The quiet battle that no one could see. The tipping point came when the world watched in horror as Britney shaved her head. It was shocking, unbelievable. The photos splashed across every screen, headlines screamed in horror. But what was behind that moment? The cameras had no idea what she was truly battling. The pressure had been unbearable for years, the constant scrutiny had slowly worn her down, and that moment, the moment she took control of her own image by removing her hair, was the first sign that she was not in control of her own life anymore. The public called it a breakdown, a sign of madness, a moment of instability. But it was more than that. It was a cry for help, a desperate attempt to free herself from the chains that fame had wrapped around her neck. She wasn't just a celebrity at that moment. She was a young woman on the edge, fighting against forces that seemed impossible to overcome. And no one understood. Not the tabloids, not her fans, no one. From that moment, things only spiraled further out of control. A series of strange occurrences followed, her interactions with the paparazzi, her unexplainable disappearances, the bizarre behavior at parties. There were nights of anger and tears, moments of isolation, and others where it seemed as though she had completely lost herself. But what the world didn't see were the hidden fears and insecurities that had taken root in her soul. She felt trapped in a life that was no longer her own, a puppet dancing to the tune of the media, the industry, and her family. It didn't take long before the legal battles began. Britney's life was no longer her own. Her father, Jamie Spears, took control of her finances and personal affairs, and the conservatorship was established, a legal mechanism that essentially placed Britney under the control of her family, stripping her of the ability to make even the most basic decisions about her own life. The world watched, and many believed this would be the end of Britney's career, her hopes, and her freedom. The moment Britney Spears spoke in court, her words sent shockwaves through the world. She wasn't just pleading for her freedom, she was speaking for all those who had been silenced, all those who had been controlled and manipulated. Her voice echoed through the halls of the courtroom, and it was clear. She was no longer the young starlet we had once known. She was a survivor, fighting for her life, for her freedom. As the conservatorship was finally terminated, Britney was free. But freedom came at a price. The scars of the years spent under control, the years spent battling not just her mental health but the very people who were supposed to protect her, were permanent. The horror wasn't over. It had simply evolved. In the years since, Britney has slowly begun to rebuild her life. But the question still lingers in the air. How much of the real Britney Spears remains? How much of her was lost to the darkness, to the fame, to the control that defined so much of her life? Only time will tell if Britney can truly escape the haunting memories of her past. But for now, she remains a living testament to the horrors that lurk beneath the surface of fame, a cautionary tale of what happens when the lights go out. The Vanishing of Jeanette McCurdy, the child star's dark secret. Jeanette McCurdy's name was once synonymous with happiness. She was the spunky, lovable girl that millions of children grew up watching on iCarly, bringing laughter into their homes with her role as Sam Puckett. It all seemed like a fairy tale, an adorable, funny teenager living her dream, appearing on one of the most beloved shows of the 2000s. But there was something lurking beneath the surface, a darkness that none of her fans could have ever imagined. It would take years for the world to know the horrifying truth behind the child star's real life. It started small, a few cracks in the perfect facade. Jeanette was always so professional, so happy. But there were moments when the laughter seemed forced, the smile painted on. She had been in the business for so long that it was hard to imagine a time before the cameras, before the fame. But what people didn't know was that behind those bright eyes, Jeanette was living a nightmare that would slowly break her down, piece by piece. Her rise to fame wasn't the typical Hollywood story. From a very young age, she was pushed into the spotlight by a mother who had dreams of her own, dreams that were projected onto Jeanette. A mother who saw her daughter not just as a child but as a means to fulfill her own ambitions. And while Jeanette loved acting, the pressure to always perform, always succeed, weighed heavily on her. As the years went on, the toll became more evident. Jeanette was becoming more withdrawn, more irritable. She was losing herself in the relentless demands of the industry and the oppressive grip of her mother. The whispers began, first in private, then out loud in the tabloids, where the public began to notice changes in her behavior. But no one knew the full truth. No one knew what was happening behind closed doors. Then it all started to unravel. One day, Jeanette's mother was hospitalized, and Jeanette stepped away from her acting career to care for her. The world watched as the once perky star faded from the spotlight. But what the public didn't know was that Jeanette had been suffering for years, quietly battling an eating disorder and deep emotional distress. The pressure had reached unbearable levels, and in the quiet moments between the screams of paparazzi cameras, Jeanette fell apart. Her mother's illness was the catalyst for her eventual decision to break free from the toxic cycle. Jeanette started to speak out. She began sharing her story with the world, revealing the truth that had been hidden for so long. Her book, I'm Glad My Mom Died, exposed the dark side of her rise to fame, revealing the emotional and psychological abuse she had endured. The horrifying reality was that Jeanette had been forced into a life that wasn't hers. The world had seen her as just a funny, quirky girl, but no one knew the deep scars that fame had left. Her relationship with her mother was manipulative and suffocating. Jeanette's body had been a battleground. Her image was controlled. Her worth was tied to her appearance. Her voice was silenced. As Jeanette recounted the trauma of her childhood, the world listened, horrified. She had been a child star, but at what cost? The emotional scars were clear. The price of her success was too high. Yet, through her resilience, Jeanette found a way to reclaim her voice. She stepped away from Hollywood and into a new chapter, where the story she would tell was hers, and hers alone. But the question remains, can one ever truly heal from a childhood spent in the shadows of fame? Jeanette McCurdy had freed herself from the hold of the industry, but could she ever escape the psychological prison that had been built around her? Her story was a haunting reminder of the dangers that come with fame and the horrifying truth behind the lives of child stars. The downfall of Amanda Bynes, a star crushed by fame. Amanda Bynes was the girl next door. Her early roles in shows like All That and The Amanda Show made her a household name, adored for her quick wit and infectious personality. As she transitioned into more mature roles in films like She's the Man and Hairspray, it seemed like she was on the brink of an even bigger career. But the world didn't know the terrifying secret lurking beneath Amanda's bright smile, a secret that would soon be revealed in the most public and tragic way possible. The first sign of trouble came as a whisper, a few strange, offbeat tweets, an erratic public appearance. But no one could have predicted what would happen next. The charming young actress, known for her bubbly personality, suddenly disappeared from the public eye, replaced by a woman whose behavior became increasingly bizarre. Fans were confused, worried, but the media pounced, quick to sensationalize every misstep, every moment of instability. What they didn't see, what they couldn't see, was the pressure that Amanda had been living under for years. The world expected perfection from her, perfection in her acting, her looks, and her public persona. But behind the glossy exterior, Amanda was crumbling. The pressures of fame, the endless expectations, the lack of privacy, it all started to break her down. The young woman who had once been carefree and playful now seemed like a stranger, lost in a world that didn't seem to care about her as a person. Amanda's breakdown reached its most public peak when she was involved in a series of high-profile incidents, including erratic behavior on social media, a DUI arrest, and a bizarre incident in which she threw a bong out of her apartment window. The public mockery was relentless. The jokes, the headlines, the cruel comments, they all piled on, making her fall from grace seem inevitable. But beneath the spectacle, there was a deeper story, one of personal turmoil, mental health struggles, and emotional exhaustion. It wasn't until Amanda was placed under psychiatric hold that the true horror of her situation became apparent. She had been suffering from severe mental health issues, a combination of anxiety, depression, and possible bipolar disorder. But the treatment she received wasn't healing, it was making things worse. The treatment of Amanda Bynes by the media and public was a mirror to the darkness of fame itself. The pressure to stay perfect, to never falter, had driven her to the edge. The haunting reality was that Amanda had become a spectacle, a tragedy for the world to consume. The Amanda Bynes that everyone had once loved was no longer there, replaced by someone unrecognizable. And even as she sought treatment and began the long road to recovery, the damage had already been done. Her career was in ruins, her reputation shattered, and her mental health was something that couldn't be fixed overnight. But the real horror lay in the fact that Amanda was never given the space to heal. The world wanted to see her come back, but they wanted it on their terms. Her story was no longer just hers. It had become a cautionary tale, a grim reminder of the dangers of fame and the deep psychological toll it can take. Amanda Bynes' haunting journey from beloved star to tabloid fodder was a chilling example of how quickly the world can turn on you, how the expectations of millions can tear you apart. And even now, as she continues her recovery, the question remains, can she ever escape the haunting grip of fame? The echoes of her past will always linger, just as the world will never forget the darkness that once consumed her. The tragic fall of Lindsay Lohan, a life lost in the spotlight. Lindsay Lohan was the poster child for Hollywood's promise. She was beautiful, talented, and seemed destined to be one of the biggest stars of her generation. Her breakout roles in The Parent Trap and Freaky Friday showed a depth of talent that few young actresses possessed. But as Lindsay's fame grew, so did the darkness that would eventually engulf her life. It was the classic Hollywood rise to stardom, overnight success, adoring fans, and a future filled with endless opportunities. But behind the glitz, Lindsay was struggling. The constant attention, the pressure to maintain her public image, and the never-ending demands of the industry began to take their toll. Lindsay was young, just a teenager, and no one could have prepared her for the burden of being the center of such immense scrutiny. And yet, Lindsay thrived, at least for a while. She continued to land major roles in movies, and her career seemed to be soaring. But then, as if on cue, the cracks started to appear. First, it was the late-night partying, the rumors of drug use, the arrests. Then it was the erratic behavior, the breakdowns, the public displays of distress. The media, of course, devoured it all, turning Lindsay's suffering into entertainment. What no one realized was that Lindsay's struggles were deeper than what the media showed. Beneath the parties and the paparazzi flashes, Lindsay was fighting a war inside her own mind. The pressures of fame, the toxic relationships, and the emotional instability that came with growing up in the spotlight had created a perfect storm that was impossible to navigate. Her battles with addiction, her destructive behavior, and her inability to cope with the overwhelming demands of Hollywood slowly consumed her. By the time Lindsay found herself in and out of rehab multiple times, the damage was done. She had become a symbol of Hollywood's dark side, its ability to chew up young stars and spit them out. The haunting images of her arrests, her public breakdowns, and her years spent in the tabloids were a testament to the toll that fame had taken on her. And even as she tried to rebuild her life, the scars remained. The tragedy of Lindsay Lohan's life lies in what could have been, what might have happened if fame had never taken such a brutal hold on her. Instead, her story became one of wasted potential, of a career derailed by forces beyond her control. But more than anything, it serves as a reminder of the dangers of Hollywood's siren call. Lindsay Lohan's fall from grace was not just a story of a child star gone wrong. It was the story of a young woman lost in the very thing that was meant to give her everything. The tragic spiral of Charlie Sheen, a star destroyed by his own demons. Charlie Sheen was the golden child of Hollywood. A star from a young age, he was the epitome of success in the 1980s and 1990s, starring in films like Platoon, Wall Street, and the hit show 2.5 Men. He was a man with it all: fame, money, power, and endless opportunities. But behind the bravado, behind the charming smile, Charlie Sheen was battling something much darker than anyone could have imagined. It started slowly, like a creeping fog. First, there were the rumors, whispers of a chaotic lifestyle, of wild parties, erratic behavior, and a growing sense of instability. Charlie's antics became the stuff of tabloid headlines, his wild outbursts and reckless behavior catching the world's attention. People laughed, people speculated, but few took it seriously. After all, Charlie Sheen was Charlie Sheen. He was invincible, right? But then the horror started to unfold. It wasn't just about the partying anymore. It was about the destruction of everything that had once seemed solid in his life. His marriage fell apart, his career faltered, and his behavior became more unpredictable and violent. The public humiliation was relentless. Every moment of chaos, every headline, was like a twisted spectacle for the world to watch. And then came the infamous tiger blood interview, a moment that would forever be etched in pop culture. Sheen's erratic ramblings, his bizarre behavior, and his self-destructive tendencies shocked even his most loyal fans. The world had watched him spiral, but this was the point of no return. Charlie's descent into madness had begun long before that moment. His substance abuse, his relationships with women, and his struggle with mental health were all factors that played into his tragic downfall. But what was truly horrifying was the way his demons overtook him. They consumed him whole, until there was nothing left of the man he once was. Charlie Sheen's downfall is a tale of destruction, a man who had it all but lost everything due to the very demons he couldn't control. His story is a tragic reminder of how fame can destroy those who once seemed untouchable, and how the battle with addiction and mental health can bring even the brightest. His story is a tragic reminder of how fame can destroy those who once seemed untouchable, and how the battle with addiction and mental health can bring even the brightest stars to their knees. The fall of Heath Ledger. The dark road to tragic genius. Heath Ledger was a name that became synonymous with a new era of acting. His breakthrough in Brokeback Mountain marked him as one of the most talented actors of his generation. But it was his haunting portrayal of the Joker in The Dark Knight that cemented his place in cinematic history. Fans, critics, and the world in general admired him, not just for his looks, but for his deep, powerful performances that spoke volumes. Yet behind the scenes, something darker was brewing. Heath's life, as seen from the outside, seemed filled with promise and success. He was a young man with a brilliant career, an adoring public, and an undeniable charisma. But that wasn't the whole story. Fame for Heath was both a blessing and a curse. As he rose in prominence, the weight of that fame began to warp his sense of reality. But what truly led him down a path of no return? Was it the pressure of being constantly under scrutiny? Was it the toll his role as the Joker took on him emotionally and mentally? Or was it a deeper, darker force, one that haunted him long before he was cast in that iconic role? Heath was always known for his intensity. His method acting was no secret, but it was in his commitment to the Joker character that the lines between reality and fiction began to blur. He threw himself into the role with such dedication that even his closest friends and family began to notice a change. He spoke of how he struggled to sleep, how he felt trapped in the madness of the character, unable to escape the chaos of the Joker's twisted mind. His portrayal was a masterclass in acting, but the cost was high. There are rumors that Heath spent hours on end in isolation, delving into the darkness of the Joker's psyche. The laughter, the twisted lines, and the chaotic energy. Heath became consumed by it, but no one knew the true horror of what he was enduring. Was it the pressure to perform, the fear of not living up to expectations, or was it something deeper? His friends and colleagues later spoke of his restless nights, his inability to sleep, and his spiraling sense of confusion. The line between Heath Ledger and the Joker began to fade, and what remained was a broken man. In the months before his tragic death, Heath had been experiencing symptoms that many would later recognize as signs of emotional and psychological collapse. Yet, despite the warnings, there was no one who could help him, or perhaps, no one could truly understand what he was going through. He had friends, he had family, but there was an invisible force, something more powerful than any external problem, gnawing at him from the inside. The weight of his role, the pressure of fame, and the darkness he had to face as part of his acting were far too much for one person to carry. The tragic night of January 22, 2008, came like a shockwave. The news of Heath Ledger's death spread quickly, but no one could make sense of it. He had been found in his apartment, unresponsive, surrounded by prescription drugs. The official cause of death was ruled as an accidental overdose, but the questions and suspicions remained. How could a man so full of potential, so beloved by millions, have met such a tragic end? As the world mourned his loss, it became clear that Heath had been struggling with his demons for much longer than anyone realized. His friends later spoke of how the pressures of fame, the intense role of the Joker, and his emotional state had all contributed to the downward spiral. But what they couldn't explain was the feeling that lingered after his death, a sense of unease as if something more sinister had taken place. Had the darkness of the Joker consumed him so fully that it ultimately claimed his life? Or was there something more, something no one could see, that led him down a path from which there was no return? In the wake of Heath Ledger's death, his friends and family were left grappling with the loss of a man who had become more than just an actor. He was a soul who poured everything into his craft. But the horror was in the realization that this talent, this beautiful mind, had been broken by the very thing that made him great. The Joker, with all his madness and chaos, had taken root in Heath's soul. And in the end, it was impossible for Heath to escape the twisted grip of that character. The mystery of his death continues to haunt those who knew him, leaving a legacy that is both inspiring and tragic. Fans continue to remember Heath Ledger for the genius he was, but behind that genius lies a chilling tale of the dark side of fame, the cost of perfection, and the price of brilliance. His death remains one of the greatest Hollywood tragedies, a life lost too soon, a promise unfulfilled, and a career cut short. But the haunting question remains: could Heath have survived? Could he have escaped the darkness that followed him, or was his fate sealed the moment he became the Joker? The answer, as always with Hollywood's darker tales, remains shrouded in mystery, leaving behind only the shadow of a genius whose greatest performance was the one he could never escape.